So our next speaker is Ian Hodson, President of the Bakers Union, a good friend of the Shop Stewards Network, this union, and very much welcome, Ian.
Sisters and brothers, it's a pleasure. It's a pleasure to be here. It's been a few years since I've been at the Shop Stewards. I think the last time you invited me to speak, we was on the Max Strike campaign, organising those workers, and I've got to say, I just heard from Jason, obviously, you know, talking about the fact that he's not a public speaker. I think you did a very effective job, mate, and I think by the end of the fight, and I think you will be victorious too, I think you'll be an absolutely brilliant face for the steel workers and the members that you represent. So well done, and solidarity from the Bakers Union. I'd like to also send solidarity to the Barnet Unison mental health workers too. You know, 60 days on strike. I mean, there's a general election going on, and apparently the Labour Party is promising a new deal for workers. And I think the Barnet Labour Council is the first council to actually make sure that when those members go on strike of Barnet Unison, they're replaced by agency workers. Agency workers, a Labour Party in action and not in words. So workers should be really concerned about the Labour Party and where we stand in the future. It's part of the reasons why, as a union, we took that decision, you know, as a founder of the Labour Party, to leave the Labour Party in 2021. And we don't regret that decision then, and we don't regret that decision now. In fact, we had a motion at our conference just last week, not last week, the week before now, and you know, not even the mover that moved the motion to re-affiliate, it actually voted to re-affiliate because it was a unanimous decision not to re-affiliate to Labour. But what really makes me proud is because one of the things that we said at the time of disaffiliation, this doesn't mean we're leaving politics. It doesn't mean we're going out of the game and we're not going to fight politically for our members. In fact, you know, the reasons why our union started in the first place was to change legislation. Because the average age of a baker, by the way, that used to work down in a cellar in 1847, when we started forming as a trade union, the average age of their life was 32 years old. I mean, it's significantly higher now because the reasons we came into being was to make the legislation to enable us to live longer, to stop people being crippled, you know, working in those cellars, so we could produce the bread. And even people like during COVID found out, you know, we're essential workers because we keep the nation fed. But for the Labour Party, they didn't feel there was any value in keeping the bakers inside the Labour Party. You know, a union that campaigned, you know, campaigned for stuff like, you know, at the time, obviously £10 an hour, at the time for ending youth rates, at the time for abolition of 0 hours contracts. I didn't think those were necessary. And we see today that under Starmer, despite standing on our picket lines in 2019, calling for £15 an hour for McDonald's workers, he's gone backwards. He's now calling for £12 an hour for care workers. £12 an hour. For people that look after the elderly in our community and people that need so much support. That's not a wage that anybody's going to be able to live their lives on. The minimum wage now should be £15 an hour. At least £15 an hour. You know, and when we launched our manifesto, because obviously we watch the TV and we watch the news, don't we? And we keep getting told what our priorities are by these politicians. You know, it's these small boats, it's all these migrants coming over here. You know, it's the immigrants taking all our housing, immigrants taking all our jobs. Well, surprisingly enough, workers don't actually think that they're their priorities. And I was really pleased when our members said, actually, our priorities are the cost of living crisis, the fact that we can't afford to put food on the table. In the sixth richest economy in the world, we can't afford to feed ourselves. You know, we found out doing a survey, you know, that we have members having to use 6% of our members in work during COVID using food banks. What made it even worse was when you realise many of them also rely on charity, you know, the goodwill of family and friends, an even bigger amount that actually use the food banks to put food on the table. Those were essential workers during COVID, a real time of crisis for this country and around the globe. And workers needed to get the support of others because their pay is so low and their jobs are so insecure. And when we come to 0 hours contracts, because our members recognise that we still need to end the use of 0 hour contracts. Not exploitative, because I tell you, an exploitative contract is a 0 hours contract. And we don't want just some of them, we want all of them to end. An absolute abolition of 0 hours contracts. If you go and work for an employer from day one, and they expect you to work for them, you should be entitled to employment rights from day one. Why shouldn't you get the right to be protected like they get the right to your labour? And so I was really pleased to see also that our members recognise part of the reason for the crisis and the lack of opportunities in our society is not because these people are coming over. It's because they privatised our utilities, they stopped building houses, and they're demanding the renationalisation of our energy, our transport, our postal services. They want it all back. And they also want the restarting of not affordable homes, but council housing. That's what we need. We don't need more affordable homes. And this is what disappoints me sometimes about the trade union movement, because we're happy to sign off on something that gives the right for bosses to determine whether or not we're entitled to the basics of living. I don't want a boss to tell me, because it's funding the Labour Party, whether I have a right to a contract of employment, whether I have a right to have my children on a 0 hours contract, whether people in work have the right to £15 an hour. We started the Labour Party, and the Labour Party should be talking to working people and representing our class and not the boss's class. That's who they should be standing up for, and that's who they should be determining who decides on the policies that represent us. But they're not going to. They're going to continue with Tory austerity. They're going to continue with the idea that the privatisation of the health service. And by the way, when it comes to West Street, and I'm hoping Leanne Mohammed is going to replace West Street in Ilford, just as I'm hoping that actually Keir Starmer doesn't get the opportunity to become the Prime Minister because he's beaten by Andrew Feinstein over in Holborn as well. But, I think there has been an interesting, look at what's going on in France, because Starmer represents the same type of neoliberal politics. He represents that same narrow interest of putting profit before people and putting business before the interests of working people. And we've seen that centrism and neoliberalism ends up by enabling the rise of the far right. And I think on the 5th of July, when we wake up to that Starmer government, no matter, how much in our hearts we hope that it's all just a trick, that he's really going to be left-wing, let me tell you, he isn't. He is what you see on the tin. This is who he is. It's what he represents. He isn't going to come out of that, some sort of dream and suddenly become the real Jeremy Corbyn that he claimed to be during his election when he lied to win the leadership of the Labour Party. He is what he is. And our lives won't get better. So on the 5th of July, all of those people that are interested in raising the lives and improving the opportunities for us and those that follow need to recognise the days of being able to think that maybe I can be more ideological on the left than you, and you don't have the same types of politics, so I won't work with you, have got to end. They've got to end. We've got to recognise we have to come together in the same way that we have to recognise that the climate issue is a working class issue. It's not a middle class woke thing. It's working class people around the world that are impacted. It's part of the reason why people are moving from one country to another. It's not just bombs, by the way. It's because of businesses and corporations stripping them and stripping their environments and making them unlivable. Those are the reasons why so many people around the world are moving. And we have to recognise the trade union movement has to start working with the climate movement. And part of what we're saying is, as part of the impact of heat, I know it's nice to have a bit of sunshine, but they say, the scientists are now suggesting that every 2 years in this country, temperatures will reach like 40 degrees, which means people will not be able to work. And we saw a couple of years ago, a lot of people, when that happened, were told, use your holidays. If you don't want to use your holidays, take unpaid time off. And if you refused both of those things, they made you come into work and found you the dirtiest job that they could. But we say, as part of the heat strike, first off, there should be a maximum workplace temperature. And the other thing we say is that we shouldn't pay because the Tories gave gas and oil licences out, because they're not serious about climate. And they shouldn't pay because the Labour Party abandoned its pledge to £28 billion in its green investment plans. It's the bosses that should pay. So we want a furlough scheme as well. So when those temperatures make it too hot to work, no worker loses pay. And I think it should be on every pay demand in every workplace across the country. No worker should have to pay. It's the bosses who have used their power and lobbying corporations to enable the climate crisis that we have. It's the bosses that need to be made to pay, and the workers that should be able to be supported no matter what the temperatures are outside because of the decisions that politicians have made. Just as I say, as part of our campaign to change the way that people live their lives, we have to have legislation in the sixth richest economy in the world that gives people the right to food, the right to eat. Sixth richest economy in the world, but yet people are still going hungry. And there's a labour movement. As a labour movement, you know, we have to think about what are our priorities. What are our priorities? Getting a Labour government or making sure people don't starve? I believe we can change politics when we realise our strength is unity, it's solidarity. And it's when we fight for the same things. And that's decent pay. That's an end to exploitation. And that's the right to food so everybody has a decent life. That's what I believe the trade union and labour movement needs to get behind. Not a Labour Party that doesn't represent us, but a trade union and labour movement that wants to raise our class, that gives it aspiration and gives it opportunity for the future. Solidarity.